Good morning, everyone. The purpose of the hearing today is to explore the issue of school construction and maintenance, featuring testimony from schools, architects, Department of Education. Hearing is being live streamed and recorded and available at education.pasenategop.com. As always, I would like to ask all of our panelists, please don't read your testimony. Just provide us with a brief summary and then allow us to dig in deeper during the questions and answers. Senator Lindsey Williams, my minority chairman, is sending her regrets for not being able to be here today. She was planning on attending, but unfortunately is unable to make it. Instead, she has asked Senator Carney to provide some opening remarks in her place and keep me honest today. So, Senator Carney, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for allowing me to comment for our members as Chairman Williams is unexpectedly unable to attend. I'm really glad that you have called this hearing. I think it's a great way to get our heads on straight, as it's been a few years since we've last discussed PlanCon, and even more years since it has taken on new projects. For decades, PlanCon has been the Commonwealth's main school facilities funding mechanism at the state level. Act 70 of 2019 streamlined and improved PlanCon and added the maintenance program to address the Commonwealth's backlog of school repair needs that have not been met. With the William Penn decision from the Commonwealth Court out of the bag, it's clear that the legislature needs to take up this responsibility to ensure that every child has an adequate learning environment. As an architect and as a senator for a district with underfunded school districts, that makes it clear that we need to place a premium on building maintenance, not just new construction. From Pittsburgh Public Schools, which spends $40 million annually on facility maintenance and operations, to schools in rural counties, schools are doing their best with the resources they have today to manage the assets that they already have. I think this hearing is a great forum to discuss the range of needs for maintenance and new construction. But as we'll hear today, and as we legislators know well, one size does not fit all, and each case is unique. This issue is not black and white, but what's very apparent is that there is a need for state action on many different types of schools and school facility projects. It's imperative that we plan, and it's an imperative that we act. So again, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to hearing from our panels.
Thank you, Senator Carney. We're also joined online by Senator Comita from southeastern Pennsylvania, as well as Senator Coleman from the Lehigh Valley. Our first testifier, please, Jessica Seitz, come forward, the Director of the Bureau of Budget and Fiscal Management for the State Department of Education. The usual formality, Ms. Seitz, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and accurate to the best of your knowledge? If so, please say, I do. You've done this before. Thank you. Please begin.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, Senator Carney and the other senators. I'm not going to read my written testimony as you've requested, and Senator Carney has stolen my show as to the history of PlanCon, but I'll just cover a few things, a few high points. To ensure that every Pennsylvania student has access to a quality education, it is imperative that the Commonwealth continue to invest in Pennsylvania's public education system and target solutions that prepare learners of all ages for the current and future workforce. In Governor Shapiro's 23-24 proposed budget, $100 million each year for 5 years would be allocated to a school environmental repairs and improvements fund to provide to schools for the abatement and remediation of environmental hazards such as lead, asbestos, and mold. Priority will be given to high-need schools based on factors that increase their students' cumulative risk of exposure to environmental hazards, including but not limited to lead in water sources, asbestos, and mold. By removing these risks, the Commonwealth can lower cumulative exposure across childhood, improve the cognitive and overall health outcomes for students, and increase their likelihood of academic and career success. The PlanCon process was reauthorized under Act 70 of 2019, and it was reauthorized to modernize the PlanCon program that was lengthy. and by creating a new application and reimbursement formula for comprehensive Plan-Con projects. The new reimbursement formula and procedure is based on the current reimbursement procedure is based on local bond amortization schedules. Under the new process, once PDE approves a project, a set 20-year subsidy plan would ensue. So it's more of a level reimbursement over time instead of the fluctuating reimbursements with aid ratios changing. Act 70 also established a separate building maintenance program for repairs and maintenance that cannot be covered as standalone projects. Since 2016-17, legislation has placed a moratorium on new project submissions. However, the department continues to process and approve projects submitted prior to 16-17 using the pre-Act 70 Plan-Con process. The department is funding about 2,800 bonds for 430 school districts and career technical centers at an estimated cost of $235 million for 23-24. Funding for the Plan-Con program comes from a mix of funding annually appropriated under the Authority Rentals and Sinking Fund appropriation from the general fund and bond funding authorized by borrowing language in the 2016 fiscal code. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today, and I'll take questions now.
Let me begin by my frustration that everyone seems to agree we have a serious problem here. But as of yet, no one has been able to tell me how big the problem is. I feel like when I'm dealing with DEP back home in Schuylkill County on some coal mining issues, and they aren't sure how deep the mine is that need to fill. Understand that there have been attempts in the past to measure the scope of the problem. In one of my frustrating days, I mentioned to Cindy, our executive director, that maybe we just need to put a bill in and tell school districts that if they don't fill out the paperwork and report to you the scope of the problem, that they don't get any money. I was told that that's probably a rather extreme method of going at it, but somehow we need to get you the data. How can we measure the size of this problem so that we can do the right thing?
The department is bound by certain legislative requirements that exist for collecting data. We did try to do a survey years ago, probably 10, 15 years ago now, and we got very low results, very low participation. We have been discussing just a restart maybe of a simple survey on building age, but again, the capacity of the current staff. What would that take, and what kind of results would we really see from that without any kind of funding attached to it, or any kind of stick attached to it? So, I think that having school districts report that, having LEAs report that is important. But we're bound by certain legislative requirements, both in the Plan-Con law and in other pieces of the school code for collecting data, requiring the collection of data.
I know school districts don't like to hear from legislators when we're considering mandates, but I don't know how we get an answer to this issue without some kind of a mandate with teeth that essentially says, if you don't do this, here are the repercussions. And so we'll continue that conversation. In the governor's proposal and looking at where the key priorities are, has the department done any analysis to see where the bulk of those dollars are likely to be allocated? Is this a statewide issue? Is it mostly concentrated in in a certain area. When I teach my college classes as an adjunct, we always talk to the students on day one as the definition of politics is who gets what, which school districts are most likely to have the greatest need for these dollars.
Are you speaking PlanCon or are you speaking the governor's proposal? I think there has been some analysis.
I'm willing to look at both, yeah.
I think there has been some analysis on the issues, and it's really widespread. I don't think there's any certain area that's more concentrated. I know that we've been working with DEP to kind of identify where those zones would be, but the way the proposal for the $100 million over 5 years, a year for 5 years, is worded, that it would be not given to any one particular area. Geography would be a measure, and there would be a cap on the amount that each applicant would receive. To kind of further answer the question about getting data, getting information, I think both the PlanCon law, Act 70, and the governor's proposal would give us a measure while attaching funding to where the problems are. So I just wanted to add that quickly.
So I guess carrot versus stick, I suppose, yeah. Senator Carney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for being here today. I do appreciate it. Since 2019, when Act 70 was passed, has the department prepared an application process for the maintenance program? And if so, if it ever gets funded, that is, and can you tell us what's involved in that?
There is a maintenance rubric that we have a proposal on. We have not published that yet. We do have guidelines posted on the website for the PlanCon piece of the program. I think we could probably, have conversations with, our team internally to kind of pull that information up. I know that we did develop all of that in preparation for that to be funded. We have developed a system to accept applications for both the PlanCon and the maintenance program. All it would take is a button push.
Well, sticking with the maintenance for a second, we said before that one size doesn't fit all. There's obviously a huge range of projects when it comes to maintenance in terms of understanding them. Has the department thought about sort of a different, the due diligence that's needed to do something like a roofing project or a boiler replacement, as opposed to something, like a building addition or a new building under the PlanCon system?
Yeah, the application process for like the maintenance program, because those are smaller projects with shorter term funding implications, the materials that would be submitted would be less. I can provide you
That's the 1 year payoff back as opposed to the 20-year?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and we can provide more details as to what that system includes. I don't have that right in front of me, but we can definitely do that.
It'd be great if you could get it to us.
Sure.
The one thing I'm curious about, is it possible for school districts to apply for multiple projects under PlanCon, or is it a one at a time kind of?
It's one building at a time. There is the ability to submit projects for multiple buildings. We do have a limit of 20 years on one building. So if you submit building A, you can, and that project becomes funded, we won't fund another project on that building for 20 years.
I see. Okay, so that makes sense. Sure. And you said you put together these things, and we haven't been able to use them because we haven't actually funded PlanCon. But do you have the capacity within the department to handle the applications and to?
Within the current authorized complement of the department, we have the capacity to do both the governor's proposal and PlanCon.
Okay. Just one more quick question, I think we'll go ahead. When we talk about facilities, we really kind of need to talk about the elephant in the room, the Commonwealth Court's decision in the William Penn lawsuit, which identified school facilities as a major factor in what makes our current education system unconstitutional. So when we talk about school facilities, it's imperative that we focus on equity. I've heard, pleas from school districts and for help from rural counties, way outside my district, as well as urban centers which are adjacent to my district. From your perspective, how equipped is the PlanCon program or the department at large to focus funding towards school districts whose capacity to upgrade their facilities is really limited? I think you touched on this before, but I just want to give you a chance.
Yeah, the reimbursement formula does take into account, has a poverty factor and a sparsity size ratio included in it, similar to BEF, the basic ed funding formula. It does take into account both urban poverty, school districts with high poverty, and rural areas where the building may cost the same as in an urban area, but the reimbursement formula is predicated on FTEs, and those FTEs might be lower. So we do include there is a sparsity size ratio included in that formula. In terms of capacity to fund local, the PlanCom process is pretty focused on FTEs and the reimbursement formula. We would leave that to the local authority, the school board, to decide whether they have the capacity to take on a building project and submit that for PlanCon or the proposal, the governor's proposal.
Suffice to say that your department is ready and prepared and ready to get these projects undergoing if the legislature decides to actually put funding towards it.
We are ready for both the governor's, the plans in the governor's proposal and PlanCon should, either one, both be funded.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think this is a follow-up to Senator Carney's question. Correct me if I'm wrong, that Act 70 of 2019 required the department to develop guidelines for school entities to voluntarily report information related to school building safety, inventory condition. Guidelines shall include building condition assessments to be voluntarily completed every 10 years. Have those guidelines been developed and published?
The guidelines have been developed. They have not been published because of the moratorium placed on the new projects and the maintenance program.
Okay.
The building condition assessment is voluntary, but it also had funding attached to it. It was it's a 2% increase in the reimbursement. It's a 2% factor in the reimbursement if they would submit a building condition assessment as part of the PlanCon.
I feel like I'm unraveling a bowl of spaghetti here, but thank you. Let me turn to Senator Coleman, please. Senator Coleman, your question.
Thank you, Chairman Argle. Ms. Seitz, thank you so much for your testimony and your willingness to take some questions today on this. I'm just trying to understand how we've, can you, from your perspective, why can't our school districts afford to take care of their own capital upgrades without assistance from the state?
So, Senator, we, at the department, we have several sources of funding that subsidize school districts for, subsidize their general fund for different things. They can use basic ed funding for capital improvements. They can use special ed funding. There are general subsidies that go into the general fund. PlanCon is just that. The governor's proposal would be just that. It would subsidize the cost. School districts are still responsible for costs associated with that project. They would just get reimbursed for pieces of that funding. They don't get reimbursed for the whole amount. It's a subsidized reimbursement.
And the state doesn't get involved with, so a project that they're helping out with, do we restrict or do we, have we thought about eliminating the prevailing wage requirements on these projects that could drive up the cost from the state? Or do we just kind of go along with what they put in their application? Do we have an oversight at all?
So in terms of the prevailing wage and any kind of other procurement requirements, we would turn to the procurement authority. Prevailing wage would be labor and industry. They have their requirements for prevailing wage and associated with school districts and other public entities. So we would defer to L&I. There is a space in the Plan-Con program. The superintendent would have to, or the chief financial officer would have to attest to following those requirements. So there's really no authority on PDE's side to control those requirements. That would be a conversation with labor and industry or DGS in terms of procurement.
I understand it. It just seems like we're forcing them, the districts, to pay a higher cost without any of that value being added, and then ultimately taxpayers are subsidizing that higher cost from the state. And so that's certainly, interesting to me. This is not like a small Band-Aid, right? I mean, this is, I think, what did you say, over 400 districts? Did you say it was, what was the number on that? 2,800 financing? Was it 2,800 financing agreements you have right now that you're subsidizing in the state?
That's correct. For 430 school districts.
Large subsidy that a lot of districts are seeking help right now. I just don't understand why they have taxing authority at their own level. Why can't they manage this on their own? Why do they have to come to the state? Why are they, in some districts, the spending is out of control. In lots of districts, spending is out of control, and there's not a lot of, ways for the taxpayers to come back and really say they're upset with the spending, short of, electing new school board directors. I'm trying to just put my finger on exactly what's going on here, but it seems like, with that many financing agreements, this is being spread pretty far. I'm just trying to understand how is this not a Band-Aid, and how is this not going to extend to other things where now school districts want to put expensive sports signs up in their stadiums, and now we have a sports sign con. At what point does this stop? What is the end goal here? What do you think? When does this stop?
There is a provision, Act 34, which privately is referred to the Taj Mahal Act, and that is any Plan-Con project. The department doesn't have authority outside of projects that aren't submitted for reimbursement. So we have authority over projects that are submitted for reimbursement under the Plan-Con process, and we do what's called an Act 34 review to make sure it's within cost indices, and that it's not more than what the school district needs in terms of capacity, takes FTEs into consideration. There is provisions otherwise in the law called Act 34 that does limit a school district's ability to take out large financing for large buildings.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just wondering why we're, how do we even think that school districts are, local school districts are viable if they can't even cover basic costs that should have been, covered in part of their budgets? This is just concerning to me, but I'm looking forward to learning more and to try to be part of the solution for a larger problem, as Chairman Argel has said. But that's the extent of my questions for you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Senator. In the appropriations hearings, we tried to dig into this a little bit further, and as I recall, the discussion seemed to go that we have allocated a fair number of dollars, a large number of dollars for these purposes, but it wasn't enough. We've heard that with probably every state agency, but it's certainly true in this. I think, number that we discussed at that point was $7 billion in new federal funding during the COVID era that could be used for a variety of purposes, including dealing with asbestos and many of these other really important issues that we do not want current in our public schools. You aware of how much in terms of state and federal funding has been allocated to address the asbestos issue, and how much yet remains on the need-to-do list?
In terms of a need-to-do list, I don't think we have that,
Okay.
because obviously we don't have
Same
a
problem that
survey,
we've
yeah,
already-
as what we
okay.
just talked about. We do have some numbers around the ARP-ESSER projects that were submitted, and we also submitted this information as part of our backup or our follow-ups to the Senate appropriation hearing. 260 LEAs indicated all or a portion of their, indicated a portion of their ARP-ESSER allocation was going for some sort of renovations and capital improvements. All of it couldn't go to that. This equates to about 8% of the total funding allocated. So these are small projects that could be completed within a short period of time. HVAC was across the board the biggest. We did have a few, but only a handful of projects that listed district-wide capital improvements or plumbing upgrades and mold remediation. So, that HVAC was probably a big component of getting the mold problems and air quality issues handled. So we did have the ARP-ESSER. I think it's to the tune of about $630 million out of that. What would have been $5 billion, $7 billion total, $5 billion of that 90% ARP-ESSER pot.
What about prior to COVID?
We have funded through the PlanCom process. We have funded annual, both through the bond and the appropriation. I can definitely give you those numbers. I don't have.
Thank you.
How many years? 5 years? Okay. We'll decide and follow up.
Senators tend to think in 4-year cycles, but if you can get us 5, that's fine. That's fine. 8, but in my House days many years ago, we had, might have been an architect. We really struggled with the issue of when to fix a beautiful old school and when to say, sorry, its time has gone in terms of both educational needs or just in terms of dollars and cents. Sometimes it takes more to fix old than build new. And I remember the discussion very vividly that said, well, Princeton and Penn and Harvard have figured out how to do this. What's wrong with the local school district? And local school districts quickly pointed out that the Tamaqua Area School District does not have the endowment that Harvard University has, and so we were comparing apples and rutabagas. How does the administration suggest we address this issue of renovation versus give it up and call in the bulldozer?
So ultimately, that's a local issue. I don't, from an administrative perspective, from a legislative perspective, I don't think we can make that decision sitting here in Harrisburg. Ultimately, it is a local issue. I think the governor's proposal assumes that renovation, not being used on new buildings. The PlanCon obviously includes new construction, but ultimately it's a board and local decision.
Okay, if my memory is correct, there was, I believe, some kind of an advisory issued by the Department of Education in those days, because school boards were being told that there was some kind of a PDE bias toward building new rather than renovating. And I believe that it was rewritten to essentially say, you know, we will not penalize you if you choose to go the renovation rather than the new construction. This is a long time ago, but I'm interested to hear if it's changed at all. Senator Carney, anything else before we turn to the next witness?
Just two real things. Just one thing about the renovation versus new kind of thing. From my experience, it's not something you can make a general rule about. That it's very much dependent upon the particular building, a particular setting. There's all sorts of reasons. There are all sorts of reasons why it makes sense to save a building. I mean, particularly from a sustainability point of view, it's often pointed out that the building is already a building that's there. But there are also times when that's not possible to reuse them in an effective way for pedagogy, et cetera. Going back real quick to the data collection thing that we've been discussing, do you have any idea what other states are doing in this area? Because it seems to me the data collection should be advantageous to school districts as opposed to a problem.
So I know that school facilities, the division chief for school facilities, did do a study out of did look at a study out of Delaware, specific around asbestos and lead. But in terms of going further out, I'd really have to check on that.
It would be, I think it'd be a worthwhile thing to find out. But all right, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We turn now to Jeff Mummert, the Business Administrator for the Southwestern School District, and Dr. Daniel McGarry, the Superintendent at Upper Darby, for our second panel. Gentlemen, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is true and accurate to the best of your knowledge? If so, please say, "I do." I do. Please begin.
Good morning. My name is Jeff Mummert, and I am the Business Administrator of the Southwestern School District in York County and President-elect of PASBO, Pennsylvania Association of School Business Officials. I also served as PASBO's representative on the Public School Building Construction and Reconstruction Advisory Committee, otherwise known as the PlanCon Advisory Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today to discuss school construction and school facilities. It has been years since Pennsylvania had a school facility reimbursement program, which has resulted in deferred maintenance, incomplete projects, and property tax increases. While federal ESSER funds allowed some LEAs a limited opportunity to engage in needed school facility upgrades, those funds expire on September 30th, 2024, returning Pennsylvania to limited options on the school facility front. My work with the PlanCon Advisory Committee was to review the existing program and make recommendations about how to modernize and improve it while avoiding the challenges that ground that program to a halt in 2016. That committee worked for 2 years to develop recommendations, which were approved by the General Assembly as Act 70 of 2019. That work, now codified in Public School Code, presents the General Assembly with an opportunity to re-engage in school facility support. The work was already done. The process was transparent, thorough, and lengthy, and the language of Act 70 provides a clear pathway into a program that avoids the pitfalls of the past. My written testimony includes more information about the language codified in Act 70, but I want to highlight just a few items. First, Act 70 reduced the previous 11-step process to a 4-step process. This is a massive improvement for both LEAs and PDA compared to the previous program. And PDE was required to develop an online application and to allow LEAs to submit documentation electronically. This work has already been completed by PDE and is ready to go. Second, Act 70 also made needed adjustments to the reimbursement formula that struck a balance between providing LEAs with needed support for critical renovations and construction projects, and providing for sustainability and budgetary control of the needed appropriation from the state perspective. Importantly, Act 70 included an adjustment factor, a factor to be set and constantly monitored by the General Assembly. This factor has the capacity to mitigate past challenges in which the program was overprescribed and funding was backlogged. Third, one of the most important components of Act 70 is a grant program to provide state funding for maintenance and repair projects that would not otherwise be eligible for state reimbursement. LEA maintenance and repair needs in school facilities across the state are substantial, and without state support, many LEAs don't have the resources to proactively address these issues on a routine basis. The result is that these projects are deferred until a much larger and more expensive problem occurs. This program is targeted to roof repairs and replacements, heating, ventilating, and air conditioning equipment, boilers and controls, plumbing systems, energy savings projects, health and safety upgrades, which could include efforts to address indoor air quality concerns, asbestos abatement, lead remediation, emergency repairs, and other projects approved by the Secretary of PDE. Act 70 also contained a provision that required PDE to develop a facility needs survey to identify the scope of the needs in school buildings across Pennsylvania. As you heard earlier, the last survey conducted by PDE was conducted nearly a decade ago, and when the PlanCon program was still mostly functioning. The intervening years, the shutdown of the PlanCon program, and the use of ESSER funds by some LEAs to engage in limited school construction and renovation projects warrants the need for a facility survey, organized and administered at a statewide level. If a new program is to begin, even if the goal is to start with a maintenance program, attaining a base understanding of the scope of needs would be valuable information for policymakers in structuring and funding a program. We think this portion of Act 70 has tremendous merit, especially as ESSER funds are coming to an end, and going forward there will be limited funds for critical school facility upgrades, repairs, and maintenance. While the need across LEAs is significant, adjustments could be made to the language passed in Act 70 to increase, as necessary, the total award amount, the eligibility, or priority of LEAs in the program, and/or the matching amount. Again, we are optimistic about the possibility of moving forward on a program of state support for school facilities. We have done the work in Pennsylvania, and the General Assembly has already adopted a structure for re-engaging in this area. The streamlined PlanCon program defined in Act 70 would allow the state to slowly step back in to being a partner in school facility construction. Because the process would take time for LEAs to progress through, and because the program contemplates paying the reimbursement over 20 years, there is no need to appropriate significant amounts of funds up front. Inching back into the program by beginning to build a reserve fund for this purpose would be a positive first step. Additionally, funding the maintenance grant program, even with a small appropriation, would be a welcome start, and certainly the decoupling of the set-aside amount as defined in Act 70 could provide some flexibility to prioritize this portion of the program to maximize LEA, student, and taxpayer benefit. I appreciate the opportunity to testify this morning, and I, along with PASBO, stand ready to assist the committee as you move forward on this critical issue. Thank you for your time and attention.
Good morning, Senator Argall. Thank you for having me into the Senate Education House Committee. Thank you for all the work that you do and allowing us to come here to talk about such important topics. I provided my comments and some presentations for you to review. I will just give you a summary. As a superintendent of schools in the Upper Darby School District, we are a very diverse, large school district in southeastern Pennsylvania. little over 12,400 students. Some of the demographics that I think are important: 90 different languages are spoken in our school community. 2,300 special education students, close to 2,000 EL English learners in our school district that continues to grow. We're experiencing homelessness, almost 300 students, a little bit over 280 in homeless situations, another 100 students in foster care. And then we have thousands of students that are either in multiple occupancy or doubling up, and they also would qualify technically as a homeless student. We have 14 different schools in our school district that are uniquely kind of configured. Some have kindergarten through fifth grade, some are 1 through 5th grade. And that's because the space in our elementary schools is just so overcrowded, and the requirements, both federally and state, to meet the needs of special education students or English learners requires different types of learning environments. So we're out of space in our elementary schools and middle school. We have 2 large middle schools, literally separated by train tracks in our community. One of them is close to 1,500 students. The other one's a little over 1,300. So you're looking at 2,800 students in 2 middle schools in our school district that funnel into one very famous, probably one of the oldest high schools in the state of Pennsylvania, Upper Darby High School, where we have over 4,300 students in our high school. That really is pretty comprehensive in of itself. I bring this forward, this demographic information, because I think it's important to talk about what you've heard. We've heard about Act 34, some of the underpinnings that guide our ability to hold us accountable to educational space and what the community can afford. In Upper Darby, we serve Millbourne Borough, Clifton Heights, and the Upper Darby Township. Very, very, very diverse community, situated just on the outskirts, obviously, of Philadelphia. So it's a very transient community at the same time. And that makes staffing predictions and enrollment predictions even more complicated, and the utilization of space for our students more complicated. We are seeing more and more students coming into our school districts that require mental health supports and services, and that includes space. De-escalation rooms, calming corners, small reading instruction, learning support space. And our schools simply don't have the space for that. We have schools that were built in the 1920s. And so when we talk about age of facilities, I do think that some of the older school facilities are beautiful and are worth considering renovating and keeping in place. And I'll get to this idea of a question that was asked earlier that we have worked on, is when is there a percentage of replacing a school or keeping a school up and running, and I'll get to that in a moment. But we in Upper Darby School District have gone through a facility study, as my colleague has just shared. I think it's important that PlanCon requires that facility study. I think it's every 2 years. At this point in time, before you can move forward with the project, you keep up to date on what your infrastructural needs are, the age of everything from your roof to your boiler, your chiller. Everything that you have in your school district should come with years of service. In Upper Darby School District, we have some equipment that is 30 years past its original lifespan. Now, I bring that up because I think it's important that through some preventative maintenance programs, good things can happen. You can have some equipment last longer than you would have thought. I don't know that 30 or 40 years past its original lifespan is necessarily a good thing, but I do think through some preventative maintenance there are positives that can come in place, and some reimbursement going along the way could probably help that 1920 school last as long as it's lasted in Upper Darby. In Upper Darby, we're so overcrowded, and funding has always been an issue in Upper Darby. We're one of the 100 most underfunded school districts. That's well known. I think I don't have to browbeat anybody about that, the latest court ruling on underfunding in public education. We are one of the most underfunded school districts. And because we are financially constrained and we're a bedroom community and they provide most of the tax base, there aren't many industries in our area. We're landlocked for those reasons as well. We've had to be very creative, like many school districts, I think, in the Commonwealth have over the last 10 to 15 years when space is at a premium. We've actually had to lease 2 parochial schools, one of which isn't even in our community. It's 25 to 30 minutes outside of our township. So taxpayer dollars in Upper Darby are going to another community, or the Archdiocese of Philadelphia in this situation, where we're busing predominantly English language students whose parents don't even have transportation readily available, 20 minutes one way and another 20 minutes back into the community. That was once considered a short-term solution in 2005, and here we are today. We still have that going on. Now, I'm probably the superintendent. There's a saying that superintendents lose their jobs not for wanting to teach kids how to read. It's how they go about it, and redistricting. There are two reasons I think that we get ourselves in trouble. And I'm in the midst of some controversial redistricting and bringing students back into schools because we believe our kids should go to school within their community closest to their neighborhood. And that's been controversial. So in 2005, because it was a cheaper way to go, we leased facilities. In 2007, because with the original lease in one of the parochial schools wasn't enough space, we leased a second parochial school. This time, thankfully, it was in the township. Those buildings were built in the 1900s as well, and they're in horrible condition. So much so that we had to help replace a boiler and a chiller in one of those facilities just a few years ago, where we wouldn't have opened after winter break. The very nature of having leased facilities, I think, speaks to overcrowding. On top of that, which I think is an eyesore in many school communities, we have modular trailers. We call them modular classrooms, I think, to make ourselves feel better about it. They were 20 years old used at the time we put them in place, and they've been for another 20 to 23 years in our school district. So imagine 20-year-old, used, and some of them are in need of significant, or they're in disrepair, and students are going outside of the building in the snow and the weather, back and forth in these facilities. One of our middle schools has 12 on the back of a campus alone. In today's environment of safety and school concerns, going outside of your building and back inside of your building isn't always necessarily the most safe aspect. Again, these were short-term solutions that have been in place for some upwards of 15 to 20 years in our school district. Most of our elementary schools don't have cafeterias or a gym. In fact, the parochial schools that we have to lease, because we're a free breakfast and a free lunch school district, where do kids get to eat? At times, in the basement of an old school, there'll be gym class going on with some kind of I call it a curtain, shower curtain, up, and the noise and the volume trying to eat at the same time as a gym class taking place in a space is a bit ridiculous, right? Many of our elementary schools lack either a gym or a cafeteria, and in some situations, they don't have either a gym or a cafeteria to provide those necessary opportunities to eat or have health and physical education classes. We have music in the hallway. We're known as a school for the arts, and if you walk into some of our elementary schools, you walk into the main lobby and instrumental lessons will be taking place, or music classes will be taking place. We are that overcrowded and lacking space, and it's a concern. We did a facility study recently. We presented it. I provided it to you as a review. I think it's pretty comprehensive. I think some folks later on that we worked with will be speaking before you today. There are excellent consultants here in the Commonwealth that provide valuable data, valuable information. We looked at a capacity study, and we also looked at basically the facilities score. What kind of condition are our schools in? From a capacity standpoint, in elementary school, you want to see about 90% utilization of your space. Okay? In the Upper Darby School District, we're so overused of our space. We need a new elementary school that can hold 1,162 kids. So we're in the process of looking to try to build a new elementary school. And by the way, to a comment I think that was asked earlier, I think it was Senator Coleman, that's just space. We wish in some ways we can compete with some school districts trying to put STEM in, or STEM schools. We literally need a classroom space for kids to go to get remedial math, reading, special education, or just a science class in the Upper Darby School District. So in our situation, our Act 34 Taj Mahal hearing is simply, we need classroom space to provide the basic educational opportunities to kids in our school district. So we're short space for 1,162 students. At our middle schools, which is based on 80 to 90% utilization, we need a new middle school of at least a minimum of 56 classrooms, just so we can provide relief to our two middle schools. We haven't even tried to tackle the concerns of capacity at the high school, because I think we can be more creative with scheduling at a high school and the age of those students. So our biggest concern is the elementary school and middle school level. From a facility standpoint, we have worked on what is called an FCI score. And really, this comes from this earlier question that was brought up. The idea that, when does it come time to replace a facility? And through our work with our consultants, it's the cost of repairs, needed maintenance, divided by the cost to replace something. And that gives you what is considered an FCI score. If you have basically 60% of buildings, from roofs, boilers, chillers, down to the paving, to the brickwork, if that's in such disrepair, greater than 60%, that's what we have come to find a place and time. So there are some barometers that you would want to consider replacing or knocking down a facility. In our school district, we are right around, 25 to 60%. We're doing a new renovation for an elementary school, so we can take that off the docket, thankfully. It hasn't gone as easily as we would like, but we are where we need to be. So we have a clear short-term and long-term plan in our school district. Here's the staggering part. Excluding a new elementary school, excluding the cost of a new middle school, without air conditioning, because we don't have all air conditioning in our school district, we're looking at $270 million long-term dollars, long-term, over the next 10 to 15 years, to replace and fix infrastructural needs. If we look at try to put AC in our schools, air conditioning, we're at $280 million, right? That's staggering, I think. I think that's I think some of the concerns that are here. And I know when you come to these meetings, you're constantly asked for money. I think what we're asking for is some support along the way. We recognize that our local tax base has to have some pride in their school community. They will have to pick up some of the tax increase related to this. It can't be just the state. It's got to be a combination of factors. But I think without relief, it's an overwhelming responsibility to taxpayers, and these buildings will continue to fall further and farther behind. And then what are we going to be left with? Much like roads and other infrastructural needs, I think schools should be considered along the same path. In Upper Darby, if PlanCon, the 2019 PlanCon, we're up and running. We're about to finish a renovation and expansion of an elementary school. We're moving forward with a middle school project and hopefully an elementary school project to soon follow. We could have received close to $30 million in reimbursement from those projects. And in our school community, that's a pretty substantial reimbursement on, let's say, a middle school that might cost us $100 million. Getting $10 to $15 million on that project would be a big deal. Obviously we're not looking for all of it right now, but some reimbursement I think would help our taxpayers see that we can move forward in a more financial reality. Luckily for Upper Darby, we did take the opportunity during COVID to go after low interest rates, and we are planning out some kind of a bond issuance over a period of time to move forward because we keep on hearing that PlanCon is going to come up and running, and it hasn't. And the concern for us is our kids are sitting in overcrowded classrooms, and it's leading to and exacerbating behavioral concerns, low achievement, and cramped classrooms and school facilities that are outdated. They do lead to lower achievement in your school. So I just wanted to say thank you. I know you hear a lot from individuals on a regular basis. Senator Carney, thanks for having me out representing the Upper Darby School District. I hope you do take this in consideration and consider, some form of reimbursement, either PlanCon or a maintenance program for consideration for the schools that do need these facilities updates. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, and I've said it many times. I'm not new to the Senate. I'm new to this role of chairing this committee, and I was shocked to find out that we did not have the data that we need to collect. We talked about that. You've mentioned it. We've talked about it with the prior. Is the solution for us to essentially say, if you do not provide us with these assessments every few years, just never going to see $1 of reimbursement? I mean, I know school districts don't like mandates, but how are we supposed to make intelligent choices if we don't know the depth of the problem?
Again, I don't want to become an unpopular guy any more than I already am at times in my own line of work. Mandates are different, obviously, depending on what they are. But in this particular situation, where you're talking about such substantial dollar amounts, I do think there should be a regular consideration of a facilities update in local school communities because you're passing the baton from, obviously they're elected officials, superintendents' lifespans are not that great. So I think this responsibility to pass this on from one group, it's almost like mapping a network in computers or technology. You should somehow have some kind of roadmap that you pass from one leader to another or one school board to the next, so you do know what is going on in your facilities. In Upper Darby, we do provide our abatement process. We do review our lead and our copper on an annual basis. I think there should be a consideration that if you're going to go after these dollars, an up-to-date facility study makes sense. And once you do it for the first 2 times, it's easier to keep up, and you should be providing, bi-monthly, monthly reports on these capital improvement projects locally to make sure that you are accountable to those to taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, I'd hate to agree, but the only way you're going to get it is to mandate it. We're all so busy with what we do. The trick, in my opinion, is to construct a survey document that can be done in an easy format that gathers the information that you need to make good decisions, but by the same token, isn't overly burdensome. We just don't have the time. That's why most of the surveys, as you heard from PDA 10 years ago, probably weren't filled out. If it's not mandated, it probably isn't happening.
Senator Carney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. McGarry, thanks for making the trip up from Upper Darby. Mr. Mumford, thanks for coming from York. You know, Upper Darby, your school district's growing enrollment every year, and you're not waiting for us here in Harrisburg, you know, to keep moving forward on the new middle school, which is sorely needed, and the new elementary school as well. You know, aside from those, you've also basically inherited a backlog of deferred maintenance projects when you stepped into this position. Can you tell us how much of your facility needs are sort of new construction and how much is related to maintenance and repair?
The vast majority of our needs are related to maintenance and repair at this point in time. Of the $270 million, again, that's over a period of time, and the work that we've done, we know in the next 2 to 3 years what we immediately have to worry about. You know, in some school districts, you worry about a snow day, and in our school district, we worry about in some of our facilities, to be very blunt, like the heaters turning on in some schools because they're that old and they're that antiquated. And they can be fixed and they can be repaired. There's a dollar amount that's needed there. Our Beverly Hills Middle School is a beautiful architectural facade of a building. I would not want to see us rip that down, but I think some of the internal mechanisms are out of date and need to be replaced and improved.
It's probably in better shape than the other middle school, though, too, right?
Sure. I mean, of the two middle schools, the newer one that was built in the 50s, I would say wasn't built as well as a school built in the 1920s.
That's probably the best
1930s.
era for school architecture. But
yeah, so the vast majority of ours in our school district really need to be repaired and updated. Now, the other part of Upper Darby that's more complicated than some other school districts, even if I were here today to tell you that I had all this land to purchase to build new schools, I don't. We literally do not have any open space or land areas, so that we have to be even more creative about what we can and can't do. So I do think in our area, we're fighting for zoning changes to build up instead of building on land we don't have. So, and repairing the facilities that we have for a lot of reasons in the community. They're considered some of them landmarks. So we're doing everything we can to refurbish those schools.
I think it's important to note that you are already a very high tax district in terms of the way that the percentage sort of thing of taxes that really go. So there's really very little room for you to tax people any more than you kind of already do. And we constantly hear from seniors about the school taxes they pay, et cetera, et cetera. So I just wanted to make sure we made that point. We talked real quick about the ESSER funding. I know that according to we heard at the Appropriations Committee hearing that we had that $631 million have been spent statewide on those projects. How did your allotment of the ESSER funds match up against your facility backlogs? And it's in your situation, was the ESSER funding sufficient to pay for those repairs and facility needs? Again,
I want to say that I'm appreciative of the dollar amount that we received in any way in funding. Getting something is better than not receiving any support. So I'm always appreciative that we've received the funding, the ARP and ESSER American Rescue Plan funding that we have received, whether it was for set-aside learning. I won't talk about what we've done for mental health and summer and enrichment and after-school programming because that dollar amount was specifically set. I would say that some of the guardrails that were in place to spend this money on facilities did complicate things a little bit, but in our school facilities, one of our buildings alone could take up $15 to $20 million, and that's what we've had to do. We've had to go through our process, which of our schools are in the most significant need of repair, and we're not adding air conditioning. We're literally fixing unit ventilator systems and boilers and chillers, and we have prioritized our work on windows and on those internal mechanisms in our school district, prioritizing it based on the most needy schools first, and then working our way through that. It's been beneficial, to 1 or 2 schools that we can get to use those dollars compared to the 14 that we have. And I'm not going to, snub my nose up at that fact that we've received that opportunity and that funding, but it's just the tip of the iceberg to what I've presented here today, the amount of work that we have to do. And we are trying to spread that out over a period of time, not to overwhelm our taxpayers to get there. Part of that does come from, I think, a comment that was made earlier, some type of a 0.5% or 1% tax increase for your capital projects is what in Upper Darby hadn't happened previously, and we are now in the process of trying to do that, chipping away at this a little bit at a time so that we leave our school facilities in at least somewhat of a better shape with a plan than we found them.
Well, again, thank you for being here today. Thank you for your testimony today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Coleman.
Thank you, Chairman Argel. Thank you, Mr. Mumert and Mr. McGarry for coming and providing your testimony this afternoon. I was wondering if you could just start, really appreciate the point of view that you bring from a local political subdivision here. Do you know, roughly, could we just go each one? Could you tell me how much money that you have in PlanCon reimbursements, what you're seeking from the state for each district, ballpark wise? Could you tell me how much, if any projects, just ballpark?
In our situation, the projects that I mentioned, PlanCon is not in place. I gave you a dollar amount that if PlanCon were up and running, we could have put those projects in place. And now the new elementary school, if you decide today to put this in place, our new elementary school could be a project that will be up and running. But what I provided you, a renovation and expansion of an elementary school, a new middle school that we're already in the process of moving forward with, and then eventually a new elementary school, it would have been about $30 million based on the 2019. This is a couple years ago looking at that, and it might be a little bit more now in reimbursement for those projects. Other than that, in Upper Darby, there has not been a lot of PlanCon. I think we're up to date and paying off. We have very little debt in our school district, and in our situation, there hasn't been really many updates or projects from a PlanCon standpoint in a number of years because we are so financially strapped. We could not continue to tax our school community. The cuts of 10 or 11 years ago were really debilitating in Upper Darby, so we're trying to recover from that period of time. These are some of the newest, would be considered PlanCon projects in our school district.
Okay, so roughly 30 million. And then for Mr. Mumert, what would you expect that to be in your school district?
So we recently completed upgrades and renovations to our middle school at a cost of about $35 million. We're currently out to bid for a high school renovation and addition project that we are estimating to be somewhere between $65 and $70 million. Neither of those are on the PlanCon tract at this point in time because PlanCon has been in moratorium and not in existence. The last project that we had that was a PlanCon project was an elementary school, $10 million, Bearsville. It was a renovation and 4-classroom addition, and that would have been done in 2014. We, as a school district, try to do renovations, major renovations, essentially gutting buildings, putting in new MEP systems on a 24-year cycle. So about the time that their life cycles come to an end, we're trying to go in there and replace them with new equipment. And so we only have 6 buildings, so it's something that we have been able to do. But with the loss of the PlanCon funding, what we've now had to do is start to increase property taxes and take a portion of our property taxes, since we're limited under Act 1 to a certain cap, we take a portion of our property taxes each year to dedicate towards debt service. Prior to the loss of PlanCon funding, we were able to do 3 construction projects, renovation projects, totaling $35 million without any tax increase because we already had taxes in place for those construction projects. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I hope that does.
It does a little bit. What's your reserve fund right now?
Our fund balance right now is approximately $6 million, $6.5 million, which is right about 7.5%.
Okay. And what would you do? How would you finance these projects should, let's say PlanCon were not in place? How would you fund the project How would you like to go and get financing for these projects? I think like a lot of the time I like to think of it as most Pennsylvanians do, a project to their home or something, and where we don't have a subsidy from the state to take out of a different pool of taxes. Though I hear a lot of things about, we're taxing, the local authority is at a high taxing, so this should come from the state. Well, the state's gonna collect revenues from somewhere, and we have to deal with that getting allocated on its own end. I'm just trying to understand, make this simple for someone that's a regular average Pennsylvanian, doesn't work in school business administration. You have a project you want to fund. You have one bucket of money that's coming from the state tax dollars that you as a taxpayer are paying into the state, that they could come and bail you out to give you some money there. Or how else would you fund this project? What would be your other option?
So to answer that question, the way we are funding the project, and this is happening right now because PlanCon is not in existence as far as a funding source, we are incrementally increasing taxes to cover the cost of our long-term renovation and addition projects. As I said, we look to do a project essentially every 4 years. We've mapped out the next 6 projects over the next 30 plus years. I actually have plans in place out to 2065 for renovation projects. And we do that because we have to look at a long-term cycle. We can't look at these things on a short-term basis. These things take a long time for them to wear out, and it takes a long time to get funding in place to fix them. So what we're doing is we're going to be, right now we have 2.54 mils dedicated towards debt service, and that's dedicated just to pay for debt service, and that's it. And we are increasing that, probably going to have to go up to 3.4, 3.5, 3.6 mils over the next 10 years in order to make sure that we will have adequate funding to pay for all the renovation and construction projects we need to do moving forward. We know that we know that we have to keep these buildings up to date. We know we have to keep these buildings maintained, and we are committed to do that. And it will impact the taxes, of course. But for example, this year we had a 0.6 mil tax increase this year, 2.75%. 1/10 of that, 6/10 of a mil, went to the payment of debt service. So we are taking a long-term approach towards handling our debt service and maintaining our facilities.
Okay.
Senator Argot, can I respond a little bit to that also from the funding standpoint? And I don't know if you want to, or you agree as a business manager. In Upper Darby, part of the taxing each year in the budget that becomes concerning. Obviously, when you go for a bond issuance, your rating is important, right? So if you have a low fund balance, I know that question is an important one that keeps coming up, that school districts have this ridiculous rainy day fund. But it's a double-edged sword. If you don't have a fund balance, the ability to borrow money, your credit rating goes down. So this idea that, okay, let's have local taxpayers pay for this, okay, let's say we go down that path. In Upper Darby, every single year, we could tax more than we have probably the wealthiest school district right down the street from us in Montgomery County near our school district. Their tax base, their ability to raise taxes is lower than ours. We can go up over 4%. We're trying to keep it below 2% this year. When you go to borrow money and do a bond issuance, the bond companies would say, tax as high as you can, because that will give us the rating to show that you're going to have that money to pay this debt down. So again, as a school district, okay, we want to do these projects. We want to keep our bond and our credit rating where it needs to be to get the lowest interest rate. But then again, if you're underfunded, which we are, how do you balance the raising of taxes in an already impoverished school community that can't afford it, and not lose your bond rating to borrow that money? We got lucky in Upper Darby that our debt was low at that period of time, which is not something I don't think to brag about totally, and the interest rates were so low during COVID, we took that risk and we capitalized on it. Otherwise, our community would not be able to afford these projects where they are, and every year when we go through our budget cycle, we're worried about balancing the taxes versus that credit rating.
Yeah, if I could go back to Mr. Moomer. So just to be clear, for the building projects right now, the planned projects, you're not taking on debt to cover these projects. You're actually increasing taxes for which you'll keep in your budgets when those projects stop, right? So are you then, so you're gonna take more in taxes to cover a project that eventually will stop, or are you building these building renovations and these capital improvements as a continual item in the budget? I guess I'm wondering, why did you determine to raise taxes versus to take debt to take care of a project on an individual basis? Why do you continually burden the tax base for a singular project and then pay off that debt? What is the thinking behind that?
So there's no thinking behind that. What we're doing is we already borrowed $30 million to go towards this $65 to $70 million project. We had some cash. You talked about cash reserves. We had some cash to go towards it, which we are going to use as well. But we looked to borrow another $30 to $35 million, depending upon what the bids come in at. Once we know an actual number, so we can get a good number. We don't want to overborrow. We don't want to borrow more money than's necessary, because then the taxpayers are on the hook for that interest payment. But once we know, we will then borrow the money necessary to complete the construction. When I was talking about increasing taxes, right now the taxes that we have in place aren't sufficient to pay for what those total cost outlays are going to be over time. And so what we're doing is we're trying to get our tax amount that we have dedicated, the tax millage we have dedicated for construction, up to the level which will cover those costs. And once we do that, then we're no longer going to be necessarily going back to the taxpayers to ask for their support to fund the building projects. We'll have that in place. We don't have it in place right now. We are borrowing money. And we would borrow money pretty much on every project. If we have any funds available, we use that as well. But we are borrowing money. There's no question about that.
Okay, thank you very much. Assuming that PlanCon would that it wouldn't, let's say PlanCon were not going to be a thing, you would be able to adapt?
We have no choice.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate, I appreciate both of your testimonies. It's really hard not to think, how did we get here? How did we get to this point now where we have these huge issues? How you're obviously doing a lot of forward thinking now. Of course, I want to believe that everyone in your position prior to you did all of the same. How did we get here? How do we get to this cliff? And what caused this, and what are the most responsible ways to move forward? Again, I appreciate Mr. Mumert and Mr. McGarry, both of your testimony today and your willingness to engage in questions. That's the extent of my questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. We turn now to our final panel. Christopher Linke is a partner with RPLS Architects. Michael Kelly is a principal with KCBA Architects. Rick Evans is the president of SiteLog IQ Northeast, and Garrett Lewis is the executive vice president of SiteLog IQ Northeast. Let's see. Here's the drill. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is true and accurate to the best of your knowledge? If so, please say, I do. Please begin.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman Argall, Senator Carney, and the members of the Senate Education Committee. We appreciate an invitation to be here today. As you said, my name is Chris Linke. I'm a registered architect and a partner at RLPS Architects in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. We've been in business for almost 70 years and have worked on literally hundreds of school projects. I submitted my written testimony previously, so I'm not going to reread that. I'll be brief in my comments. The challenges public schools face with their building conditions are complicated, diverse, and pervasive across the Commonwealth. My testimony provided a real-life example of how a rural school district is impacted by not having the financial support of the PlanCon process. The AIA believes that PlanCon needs to be reinstated as a financial support system in which all school districts have an equal opportunity to provide appropriate school facilities and learning environments for the future. I'm here to answer any questions on my written testimony or in general, but I would like to turn it over to Mr. Kelly.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator Argel, for this opportunity today, Senator Carney and all the other senators and members of this committee. Thank you very much for addressing this very important topic. My name is Michael Kelly. I'm an architect with KCBA Architects. I'm also the architectural representative on the Senator's School Safety Committee. So I'm very honored to be part of that and can certainly answer any questions that you may have today on school safety. I'm also a William Allen High School graduate, so I'm a product of Pennsylvania Public Schools, of two young children in public schools as well, so obviously very personally passionate about public education. So much so that 7 years ago, almost to this week, I did this exact thing at Mayes High School in front of a committee very similar to yours, talking about the need for PlanCon funding. We joked about how cars have actually upgraded their safety and their technology over years. We talked about how phones have changed how they look and their safety and technology, and we've all kind of agreed that those are all very good upgrades and just part of technology and modern progress. What we also talked a little bit about is how our schools have not done that. Way too often, our schools are kind of just left as existing conditions. One of the questions earlier was about, well, what do you do if there's no PlanCon? And there are some great school districts that are doing their best, trying to be fiscally responsible, but there are far too many school districts that the answer to that question is they're doing nothing. So some of these images and some of the testimony, when I was asked to do written testimony, I pulled out my testimony from 7 years ago. I read it and went, yeah, that still works. I don't really have to change too much. Now I did update that. But unfortunately, a lot of those issues still remain. So I wanted to share and some visuals here. You know, this is an existing classroom, a classroom here that's desperately trying to deal with just humidity issues in their space. Classrooms that are in basements, that are inaccessible. You can't even get down there if you have accessibility issues. This is a classroom in Pennsylvania. This is a picture from last week of a classroom. This is happening right now. Classrooms where, again, HVAC issues, we've heard that a couple times today, are being mitigated with ceiling fans, but the ceiling fan is unsafe, so we got to put that in a cage. So this is an elementary school classroom that a child may be going in. A lot, you heard Dr. McGarry talk about oversized or undersized classrooms with way too many students in that. We see that far too many times, too much furniture in there. Kids have to kind of weave their way through unsafe spaces to get in and out of their general classrooms. Special education, because so many of our buildings are so old, they didn't have special education classes, really, back in the 50s. Now we do so much better of ideas of monitoring those things and understanding those things. My wife's a speech therapist. Her office in a lot of these schools is in a hallway. Just sitting out in the hallway or a desk in the middle of a space. You're taking children that may need, that have the most attentive issues or challenges with attention, and you're putting them out in the corridor. That's also a bit of a fire hazard. Areas like this where you've got filing cabinets and desks, this has created a 4-foot wide hallway in a classroom or in a school. Open pod systems are still around. We still see this. Again, these are pictures just from a couple of weeks ago. Classrooms like this, where elementary school students are walking in, there's no doors, there's no windows, there's no way to secure those spaces. They're walking through and around storage spaces. You know, we got laundry tubs sitting out full of supplies. This is a current situation in our schools today. You know, spaces like this that, you know, we talk about areas with sensory needs. Walking into a space like this just overwhelms a child. And again, there's really no way to lock those types of spaces down. In some schools that did have open pods where they did try to lock some things down, you're fighting against oftentimes geometry like a circle here, where again, you're creating a 4-foot wide hallway or partitioning things off with particle board. There's no sound insulation in there. There's no, that's not a very secure wall. And it's certainly not a fire-rated wall. So these all to make a classroom that may not have a window in it anyway. So these are all systems and things that we're seeing in modern schools today. Schools that are still using coal as a primary heating source, or exposed electrical transformers right down the hallway from a student's classroom. A lot of these schools are trying their best. They're giving, you know, positive messages and things like that, like, hey, let's You know, we're all here for good things, but it's hard to portray that when this is the door to your classroom. You know, a child walking down to a basement, walking through this door to get into their classroom. A couple of months ago, we were honored by U.S. Deputy Secretary Ms. Martin to come to a school, a local school, to walk through and see some of the existing conditions and see how some of the ESSER fundings were being utilized there. And I shared this image with her while we were there. I said, all right, it's in March, but it was kind of a warm day in March, yet they hadn't turned over the air conditioning system yet, so the heat was still on. To mitigate that, they turned the air conditioning on, so now you've got two things fighting each other. And because that really wasn't working, they opened the window as well. So we literally had two different air systems, all that kind of just going right outside anyway. Meanwhile, both of them were just shaking and making noises. That's not a very good environment for our children to be learning. Mentioned earlier about the Taj Mahal. We're not talking about knocking everything down and starting a Taj Mahal. We're talking about sometimes a new building, just a new school, nothing over the top, just something that's adequate. This building in particular replaced that building, 3 circles. As good as we are as architects, we can't renovate our way out of a circle. This was a building that had open pods, pie-shaped classrooms. There was no way to secure a corridor. 5 feet down the hallway, kids would disappear. They had massive issues there. So that was replaced with this building back here. Again, not the Taj Mahal, just something much more adequate and modern. As has been said a lot, most of these projects are renovation projects. Here's a library that really no one was using, and we came in and just kind of updated that. New furniture, new lighting, brighter colors, things like that that are much more adaptive to public education today. This was, in the same school, this was the first thing you walked into, a storage closet that no one was using and a classroom that was empty, and we just took the walls out. That's it, just there in that little part of the lobby there, and created spaces that were much more engaging for project learning and areas for students to engage in, and provided a little bit of a modern feel to that high school. The rest of the high school just got a paint job, that was nice, but just having that library, just having that new entrance space like that, spaces like that were desperately needed. At Altoona, we had a school that was 100 years old. You can see not a lot of windows in this 4-story, actually had a basement, so it was a 5-story high school. Most of the classrooms were actually undersized, less than the state minimum, and they had far more students in them than they needed. And this was a project that replaced just that building. It was that high school is actually 2 buildings. So we just replaced that, but it allowed us to pull 9th grade into that area from their middle school. Their middle school building was somewhat new, so we pulled 6th grade into that middle school. Pulling 6th grade out of their K-6 elementary schools allowed 10 elementary schools to immediately meet their capacity concerns without even touching them. We just moved 6th grade into the middle school. Now they have science labs, which they didn't have before. We moved 9th grade into this newer building that offered all kinds of different academics as well. What that old building didn't have was a wood shop. This building now offered that opportunity for the students. A metal shop, robotics labs, science commons. It gets a little cold out there in your state college, so to be able to have a space like this where they can do experiments in an enclosed space throughout the year was important. Their television studio, one of the features and pride of their district was in a closet in the basement. We brought that up and created a much larger area for that. Music space that was in a windowless area in the basement, not accessible, provided natural light. Visual arts was a pride of their program as well. Stuffed in a basement that no one saw, we brought that out of that area. All of those projects happened because they were eligible and received PlanCon funding. All of those conversations about we don't want to raise taxes, we have to be fiscally responsible, all of those things happen, and they are important conversations for school districts to have, but they were able to do this just because of that a little bit of additional funding, sometimes as little as 14 cents, 12 cents on the dollar. So we're not talking about 90% of that being funded by the state. Sometimes just that 10%, that 12% is what gives the school district the ability to make those types of improvements. Back in 2014, you had asked about some studies. Back in 2014, PDE did do a school facilities study, and it showed that most of the buildings in Pennsylvania were built before 1970. So a lot of that is coming right out of World War II. A lot of that's before the energy crisis. A lot of that is certainly before some of the building sciences that we do today. So PlanCon came around in the 70s. Actually, school funding started in Pennsylvania in the 50s. PlanCon started in the 70s in an effort to help out with that and establish some credentials and just some criteria to meet in order to get PlanCon funding. And as we said, Act 70 in 2019 modernized that system, take it from 11 forms to 4, understood a little bit more that not every school is going to have typewriting studios, that's still on the forms, planetariums and things like that that we don't always see in our schools today. So it upgraded those forms and understood how modern elementary schools were being run. There was no credit in the past for a music room or a library. Imagine an elementary school without a library, but in the 70s that was not part of the funding formula. So now it is, and it's ready to go. That's the good news. We're ready. We have that mechanism set. It's been approved. We just need to turn that on. When you look at the PlanCon website now, it talks about here's all the forms, we're ready to go, but the 2023-24 school year, we're not accepting. The shop is closed because there is no funding for that. So the forms are there, the mechanism is there. Those forms for Act 34 hearings, we're still using the older forms. So even starting there, allowing the newer forms to be the requirements for the Act 34 requirements of making sure that we're staying within spending limits, that would be important. That would certainly help school districts in a lot of different ways. And certainly turning that program back on, as we mentioned, bringing a lot of those things down. So when we talk about indoor air quality, how can we improve that? How can we do better for the next COVID piece? Our point today is fund PlanCon, bring the funding back on to allow for that. Asbestos and hazardous materials, you can kind of see here a school that got started. They actually had a leak. They had to rip up part of their school, but the rest of it still has that asbestos flooring. This is being remediated right now as part of an ESSER fund project in a school district. This is going to be remediated this summer, but they weren't touching it until they had ESSER funding. And as we said, that goes away in a year. So you want to improve those things. PlanCon is that catch-all. PlanCon can address those things. Here's a school, that kind of half-circle school I showed before. To get to those half circles, you either got to go up a half level or down a half level. It's not really ADA accessible. They have a chairlift, but that takes about 2 minutes to get up and down, and no one can get up and down it. So there's a big difference between accessibility and ADA friendly. That's not a very ADA friendly way for a child with the most physical needs to be able to achieve that. So again, we want to fix those things. Let's restart the PlanCon funding. School safety, again, one of the things I promote the most on that panel. There's a lot of money going towards mental health and a lot of money going towards nurses and guidance counselors. That's extremely important, and we've advocated for that throughout all of that Act 44 money. And my point was always, you want to fix the buildings, let's just turn PlanCon back on, because that's the mechanism where we can integrate a lot of the best practices for school security. So again, we're trying to find kind of equitable school environments throughout the state. Yes, there are some school districts that have some very nice buildings, but the predominant school districts, mostly throughout the state, do not. There is an inequality through the state between buildings that are from the 20s that could be renovated, but are not, or buildings that just need to be replaced or modernized. So again, let's hit that start button and start that process back up again. And the good news is all of those forms and mechanisms are already modernized and set and ready to go. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Argyle, or Chairman Argyle and Senator Kearney for hosting us today, and the rest of the Senate Education Committee that was able to join us over Zoom. On behalf of SiteLogic, thank you for inviting us again to participate in this important hearing on school reimbursement for construction in Pennsylvania's K-12 facilities. My name is Garrett Lewis. I'm the Executive Vice President of SiteLogic. With me today is Rick Evans, the President of SiteLogic. SiteLogic, we've heard a lot from educators, we've heard from PDE, we've also heard from architects now. We're everything but those four. Is kind of the best way to introduce ourselves. We are dedicated to delivering comprehensive facility solutions that support both resiliency, future-proofing, energy saving, operating efficiency, and sustainability goals for our clients. We do currently employ 110 Pennsylvania-based residents, and our experts are made up of educational consultants, program planners, former superintendents, facility analysts, master planners, certified energy managers, controls, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, design engineers, and we also do have architects on staff but do not practice architecture in this state. Today, we serve over 40 Pennsylvania public school districts currently under contract, roughly $1.7 billion of total construction under management at SiteLogic in the state of Pennsylvania. 95% of what we do in that volume is Pennsylvania K-12. Both Rick and I have dedicated our careers to Pennsylvania K-12s and the needs that they have. We're both also proud graduates of the Pennsylvania Public School System, and I'm the proud son of a former Pennsylvania public educator. One of the things that we wanted to talk about today is that in March, Governor Shapiro outlined his priorities for the fiscal year 2023-2024 budget. The proposed budget contained a program that would create healthy learning environments for all Pennsylvania students by investing another $100 million in matching grants for schools to make environmental repairs and improvements. The number of districts that we see that are burdened by costly asbestos remediation abatement continues to increase. I think you saw some of that in the photographs that Mr. Kelly just presented. Additionally, the proposed budget called for $100 million in school safety and security grants to address physical safety enhancements. We believe that these are critical investments that will have a direct impact on the educational experience. But what I will say is, while there's no disputing the aging infrastructure of schools across the Commonwealth, the process for implementing those critical infrastructure improvement investments is what brings us here. SiteLogic can confidently say, in the absence of Plan-Con funding, districts have in fact shifted their priorities away from new construction and toward long-term facility maintenance. That's what we want to talk about today, long-term facility maintenance. I think you heard one of our clients, Dr. McGarry of the Upper Darby School District, talk about the study that we have participated in with them and the steps that they're taking to address their needs in the absence of the Plan-Con program. Before discussing that, though, we do want to contextualize. I think there's three factors that really drive costs for Pennsylvania public school projects. It's number one, deferred maintenance, number two, capacity constraints, and then three, programmatic and functionality challenges. That's, I think, Senator Argall, what gets to your question of can we quantify these needs? What does that look like across the state on a per district basis? We at SiteLogic are invested heavily in a proprietary tool. We've spent our own money developing a tool called MySetIQ that does just that, that quantifies those needs and those under those categories for Pennsylvania public schools. I have yet to meet a public school administration, a public school board, that when we present this tool and its capabilities, that doesn't want something like this type of long-term facility master plan to put in place. It gets at your question where, hey, school districts don't like mandates, but I have yet to find one that isn't supportive of this type of tool. The tool does answer the question that you asked. It gives users, in addition to that, business managers, superintendents, facility managers, and administrators the ability to review their plan and see the costs associated with each facility improvement measure. We do analyze all facility infrastructure, all owned infrastructure. So that is every single HVAC unit, every single plumbing fixture, everything under the sun, as well as architectural finishes and renovations. I think Rick and I want to stress that if the intent behind enhancing the Commonwealth's public education facilities is to improve test scores, increase student and teacher performance, reduce absenteeism, as that's the number one driver of student academic success and performance, and provide efficient buildings that control operation and maintenance costs, we have to recognize that the Plan-Con program prior to the 2019 iteration, Act 70, the Plan-Con program in 2016 and prior, it actually disincentivized school districts' ability to achieve those outcomes because it highly incentivized new construction. And whether we can debate whether or not that's true, but that was the perception of the program, and we believe that it was largely responsible for driving school districts into the funding practices or into the building practices and facilities maintenance management practices that you see today that have driven some of these large deferred maintenance backlogs. SiteLogic believes that the legislature and governor should they choose to fund school construction reimbursements, it's imperative that we prioritize and emphasize long-term facility maintenance as equally as new construction. Like I said, Plan-Con funding as it was administered in 2016, we believe that it disincentivized those types of investments. Instead of rewarding proper maintenance and operation, it rewarded those who were looking at or driving towards major reconstruction and renovation of facilities. Districts were instructed to budget and plan around a 20-year window for reimbursement when state funding for new construction would become available again. With that condition in mind, the incentive to properly maintain was not appropriately encouraged, and which led school districts toward more costly projects that replaced all systems and finishes instead of evaluating the remaining useful life of the infrastructure. The absence of Plan-Con reimbursement has not led to school districts stopping their facility needs conversation, nor has it led to them to the discontinuation or the decontinuation of investment of state and local funds in facilities. It has led to creative and budget-conscious decision-making that should be celebrated. Our Pennsylvania public schools are still electing to renovate, add on, and build new educational facilities, and you heard that from the educators that were sitting here today. They're doing that in the absence of Plan-Con, right? So that's something that I do want to stress. Mandating that the process be directed in a certain avenue by certain professionals has also been harmful, I think, to the overall investment and the taxpayer as well. But Rick, I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to add
I
to
do.
that.
Thank you and good morning. As you heard earlier, we are under contract with over 40 school districts, roughly, close to 10% of the school districts in Pennsylvania. I think that gives us a really good sampling of, from the most underserved to the most well-served districts across the state. And some of the things you're hearing today and the themes are something we refer to in the industry as warm, safe, and dry. They need a roof over their head and caulking and sealing to keep water infiltration out of the building, which makes it very difficult to control the indoor environment. They need heating and air conditioning systems, not only for comfort, but to improve indoor air quality and improve the learning environment within that facility. And they want to be safe. They want the students to feel safe in their facilities. And these are the driving themes. What we've been doing since PlanCon was stopped in 2016 is directly addressing those types of themes throughout school districts across Pennsylvania. And we've brought a lot of, I spent part of my career in private sector, seeing how facilities were maintained by businesses that own facilities as a business. And when you look at a facility, it's comprised of many, many different systems in there, and all those systems have different lifespans to them. And the concept of a period restoration really goes against, the idea of long-term facilities maintenance and looking at each individual system within that facility and getting the maximum life out of that facility. When you do that, you dramatically reduce the cost of ownership of real estate. And that's what we've attempted to do, is bring more of a private sector approach to public schools in Pennsylvania. We've been very successful at doing that. So yeah, we do advocate for funding public schools, absolutely. But we advocate doing it in very, very responsible ways that are very, very cost effective and not wasteful.
Thank you.
One of the challenges, there are many, addressing these interrelated issues is just the sheer diversity of Pennsylvania. We've heard from school districts today that have had some incredible needs right now. We have other school districts that haven't had to build a new school in 10, 20, 30 years, and some of their schools are sitting empty. Of course, this is Harrisburg, not Hogwarts, so I, can't take a school and, move it across the river. Others, and I'm thinking of some of our universities, the population estimates that they were planning for were inaccurate, and so they ended up building buildings that they are now paying debt on that they do not need. How do we correctly utilize population forecasting so that we don't find ourselves paying for empty school buildings 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now?
I'll take that. I mean, I think there are ways to design buildings that have intended spaces for additions to the buildings and building a little bit of infrastructure in there, as opposed to, well, we're going to build it all out now for 10 years in the future. No, let's build a core that can support it and then have areas on the building for additions.
Also, when you talk about enrollments and demographics, there's 3 different areas that affect the capacity of a school. It's the growing enrollment, with houses being built, people moving in. It's special education. Special education takes more space than it ever has before and has taken over hallways, stairwells, and those aren't the spaces to move into. And then when we talk about the educational component of future-ready, student-focused education, there are more spaces and bigger also. So it's not just how many people are moving into the district. There's a number of different ways you have to adjust that or recognize that through a feasibility study. But you're right, you also have to have ability to not overbuild, and yet something you can add easily in the future if that bubble comes. You can accommodate a bubble through a school maybe at 10%, but after that, then you have to have something you can get to the next step.
The emphasis on long-term maintenance and not accidentally requiring new construction when it is not needed. How do we get that right in terms of the legislative language? Understanding, as the first witness talked about, local control, and so where's the right balance? How do we correctly word that in a piece of legislation?
Yeah, I think somebody asked a question of PDE earlier. What are other states doing? Rick and I have had the pleasure to operate in Minnesota, Iowa, 9 states across the Midwest, actually, as well as California. And I can tell you what some of the other states are doing from that perspective, because I think it starts to get at this question. Other states have had this problem and they've found resolution. I'm not saying that it's perfect, but there are answers to that. I can speak to the state of Minnesota specifically. They do require all school districts to have a long-term facility maintenance plan available to them. The motivation and the ideation behind our tool, our planning tool, our long-term facility maintenance planning tool, came from designers and contractors in the state of Minnesota that were providing this type of tool and this level of plan, the sophistication of plan to public schools in that state. The reason for that is it's very different than the traditional feasibility study, which most districts have in the state of Pennsylvania. It's truly a facility assessment. It's truly analyzing the asset conditions, itemizing the assets that they have, and understanding how they're performing against their life cycle, the equipment life cycle. Those plans, and I think where the state of Pennsylvania needs to go, is really dictating and directing what that plan must comprise. And what those districts must put forward to be eligible for Plan-Con reimbursement. I mean, that's how kind of that state did that, and I can tell you there was some ingenuity from the private sector that came out of that, and we brought that tool east. It's selling very well in the state of Pennsylvania right now for a lot of reasons, but what it also does in addition to that is these plans make sure that, as superintendents change, as school board members change, you're continuing to make responsible investments in your facilities annually that prevent deferred maintenance backlogs. That is what these districts have. That is the single driver of need right now. It's deferred maintenance. It's not new construction. It's not capacity. Yes, we've added needs based off of requirements to educate our special education, and deliver our special education curriculum. But the biggest need right now is deferred maintenance and funding to support deferred maintenance. And what the state needs to do is help PDE incentivize school districts to make responsible decisions in addressing their deferred maintenance backlog. If they want to build a new auditorium, they want to build that new gymnasium, they want that shiny object, that's something the local taxpayer should be beholden to. That's a local decision that they should be willing to put the money up and make that investment. But the state, we believe, should be investing in and supporting long-term facility maintenance plans.
I would agree with that. Let me add as well, in working with educators, while the shell of the building, the windows, the heat, the roof, and all of those things are very important, inside the building are children, and we're educating them. So as that has changed, we don't educate children the same way as we did in the 70s. And I had mentioned before about special education needs. Well, we'll look at reports, PDE reports from the 80s, and it says, well, this building says the capacity is 500. I said, yeah, well, you didn't have 2 emotional support classrooms, 2 autistic support classrooms, and a life skills classroom. What that did, and those classrooms are extremely important, it took 5 classrooms off the capacity. So you didn't do anything to the building didn't fall down, you didn't add anything to it, but the capacity changes as educational needs change. So what Plan-Con has done very well in the past has said, we need a report. Every 5 years, I thought it was, before you do any building project, there should be a feasibility study report. It's going to talk about every building, it's going to talk about the physical needs, but it's also going to talk about the educational needs of those buildings as well. Before you invest in anything, before you do a new building or a renovation, what else is there? What else is coming down the line? Don't build that new school if you've got $100 million worth of other things you got to do. Maybe we have to make some different decisions. And those types of studies have driven that. We've far more projects that we work on in our practice over 50 years has been renovations than new construction. But oftentimes as enrollment grows, an addition is needed, or another school. We're working with a school district right now on a small project. They have a huge Ukrainian population. They were supposed to get a 15% increase in enrollment over 10 years. They got it in the first 2. The war broke out. They had 50 kids showed up about a week later. we need to educate those students. So we need to, Dr. McGarry had mentioned earlier about a 90% rate. So you try to fill your tank about 90% of the way, basically meaning if that bubble comes, yeah, we don't have to build a huge addition, but I've got a little bit of extra space. And I don't think there's a teacher around that wouldn't be okay with having, 23 kids in the class instead of 25 kids in the class. But when 25 kids in the class becomes 29 because you don't have any space for anything, that becomes a big problem. So those capacity issues, as well as all the infrastructure issues, are part of those studies that PlanCon has always required and does require in the new process as well.
Senator Carney.
Thank you, Senator. Great testimony. Thank you very much for being here today. It's nice to have architects and people who work in the architectural profession come and testify for us. And the visuals were great too, so that was a nice thing. It seems to me that under current PlanCon law, 75% of the funding seems to be designated to go to new construction. And so it's like a 3-to-1 sort of thing in terms of the way it's set up now. It seems to me that's kind of on its head. I think where should the state really be in terms of how it's funding school facilities? Geared towards new construction, or basically, as Garrett was saying, towards the stewardship of existing facilities? If we can finally decide to actually fund PlanCon to get it moving again, would it be a better investment to put money towards maintenance and less towards construction?
I would answer all of that. Again, I think some of the reasons that some buildings that you see are replaced is because they just weren't maintained over time and they physically fell apart. Areas, and that becomes a school security issue as well. Doors that you just shake a little bit and the door opens. I think to the comment earlier about allowing those local groups to understand those things, sometimes we do have to allow that process to occur because there's such a disparity between all of these school districts. There's going to be some school districts where buildings are fine, they were built in a good age, they've been maintained over time, that's great. There's other school districts where things just got away from them, and things are just not at a point where it's putting good money into bad. So allow them to study, allow other professionals to come in and help. Say, all right, let's try to minimize what you need to do, but here's the thing that really needs to happen. And sometimes that's new construction, it not always is. Obviously, new construction costs a little bit more, so that's maybe why the portions of dollars are higher when it goes to new than maintenance. Really the answer to that is there needs to be maintenance funds. There needs to be ways that schools can enlarge their buildings when they need to, and there needs to be mechanisms as well for new construction. And that's the nice thing about PlanCon is it's that catch-all for all of those things. It does provide money for those maintenance projects, the renovations, and it does provide money for other alternatives as well.
I mean, we're discussing certain tweaks to the PlanCon right now moving forward, and one of them is sort of trying to put an emphasis again on the smaller maintenance projects as opposed to the shiny new object ones. So it'll be interesting kind of moving forward to see if we can get something moving along those lines. But I agree with you completely that PlanCon is a mechanism that people basically understand, and we've been making it better. I mean, obviously we made it better in 2019. We just need to literally step up and kind of, if we learned any lessons from the pandemic, it was about things like air exchanges in a classroom are a really big thing, and stuff that we should be supporting. So again, thank you all for coming today. I really do appreciate your testimony.
It reminds me of one of my meetings with the Blight Task Force where we talked about all of these new tools that we'd given local government in terms of code enforcement and regulatory authority. And one of them said, "Thank you very much, Senator, but how about some cash?" And so message taken that day. Senator Coleman.
Thank you, Chairman Argel. Thank you, Mr. Linke, Kelly, Evans, and Lewis for your testimony this afternoon. Mr. Kelly, when I see those photos of our schools, I can't, it infuriates me. And I think it should infuriate, those photos should be sent out to every Pennsylvanian, because what I think that shows is a failure of the local school districts to plan at all in a responsible manner. That we have, as the other gentleman had just said, teachers teaching in hallways and in stairwells. What are these school boards doing to plan properly? I think this shows a complete failure on the local school boards to have any type of idea of what's going on and to plan. This wasn't overnight. And I'm trying to balance that with the, since the 1980s, Harrisburg, we've chipped in $8.1 billion in this. And I think from 2010 to 2015, it was like an average of 300 million annually before we finally turned off the spigot there for a bit. And I just have to try to balance this to understand how much of this is a failure of local. I mean, every Pennsylvanian should be getting out to change the leadership if this is the planning that's a result of local leadership in planning for schools. And I guess as we do that, we have to look at finding out what's driving up the costs here. But again, I'm not so sure that PlanCon is the fix to all of this. I think that ultimately this has to be leadership at the local school districts to be responsible in their planning. I'm not so sure that we have gotten to where we are overnight or in the last 3 years. I think these were things that, some school directors have been in there for 20 years. And what have they been doing? And I think Pennsylvanians have an absolute right to understand what is the planning in place in our schools and how did we get here? This isn't showing that we need more funding from the state, I think, to fix these problems. I think it shows what has the planning been? And Mr. Lewis, I just had a question do you believe that the prevailing wage in Pennsylvania drives up the costs for our public school improvements?
No, without a doubt.
Okay. What do you think, where is the middle ground here on also making sure that our school boards and local elected officials are planning properly so that we don't get into these situations while also ensuring an adequate funding for example, in Philadelphia schools, I think they found that their schools are some of the worst and they need some of the most help. So where is there a balance? Does anyone have could anyone speak to educate me maybe on where we get to a nice balance of forcing some planning? I mean, I don't really want to have to do that. I think voters can force their planning on with electing new school board directors when they see these things. But do you think we have a duty to have some sort of planning built in more than we do to ensure, you're all professionals here, right? Especially those of you who are architects. I mean, how early should we have started these discussions?
Yeah, I think to answer your question, I think that's a great point that you make. I think the state's involvement, from my opinion, should be in helping these local agencies plan, right? That's where the investment should be. The state should be making investments in helping ensure that these LEAs are not making these poor decisions with state funds. Because we can throw more money at a problem. If it's mismanaged, we're only going to continue to throw more money. That's not solving the problem, right? The money itself is not always the issue. To the point of the photographs that we saw, there was $8.1 billion of state investment made in school construction, and we could sit here and show many, many pictures of beautiful school buildings, some academic buildings that you might question, is that necessary? Is it necessary to deliver a quality education and facility like that? There are just as many examples of those across the state. So where I think what we're asking the legislature, and I believe the Senate and this committee, is to say, okay, hey, where the state needs to be a leader is making sure that in the absence of proper planning, the state is incentivizing just that, planning. Because of the turnover that we see both at the superintendent level in these school districts as well at the school board level, that in and of itself inhibits good planning. Even if we're well-intended, that constant turnover in and of itself prevents these school districts from really being able to incorporate a long-term plan of any kind. Facilities, education, whatever that might be. So I think that's where the state can really help the LEAs, is really encouraging best practices as it relates to planning and management of their facility stock.
Yeah, I agree that that's a great question, and the debate here is, what's the responsibility of the state versus what's responsibility, locally. And, again, I would fall back to the warm, safe, and dry concept of, the state, especially for the underserved districts, owe them a warm, safe, and dry environment. and the guidance as well in terms of the larger projects and that type of thing. But the split is a
Yeah, the planning is very important, I agree.
And to follow up on that, I mean, your average school board member, these are important positions, but neither they nor state senators are always going to be equipped, given our very diverse backgrounds, to make the right decisions without some professional guidance. We can listen to it, we can ignore it, but we should at least consider it. Is there enough, given our new workforce shortages that we're now seeing across the state, is there enough professional guidance available to these school districts uniformly across Pennsylvania? I mean, are the services available to everyone that needs it?
I would say that Pennsylvania, of all the states that we've worked in, is probably the most well-served from a competitive landscape for these services. I think that there are quality planning professionals in this state, and I think everybody here should be proud of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm shocked back home when I see employers that used to turn away thousands of prospective employees now holding job fairs because they just can't. And so I wanted to make sure that our school districts have the needs. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Senator Coleman. Do you have any additional questions?
Mr. Chairman, you can interrupt me whenever you see fit. No, again, Mr. Evans, warm, safe, and dry, as you say, absolutely. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I'm just trying to make sure that, if we're turning the spigot on, if we're talking, I really like the way the discussion was going a little bit on making sure that the planning, focusing on a really high attention on the planning and support for school districts that have a high turnover rate in school board directors and or superintendents and or business professionals, making sure that they have the tools to properly plan so that when my son and daughter are raising their family, that they're not now looking back and saying, oh, since 2023, the state has spent an additional $300 million a year or whatever it is, and now they're still in the same position. So how do we stop this bleeding and get it, get ourselves back on track? But again, thank you, Mr. Linke, Kelly, Evans, and Lewis, and that's I have no further questions.
I'd just make one comment on that.
Yes, please.
Because it's such an important point that the retention of institutional knowledge concerned with your facilities is critically important as administrations and boards transition over. Very, very important concept.
Because I think you've all made the point that when mistakes are made, if that roof isn't fixed within a few months, there's going to be some pretty expensive decisions to be made that could have been averted. And I think we've all seen it. I've seen some older schools that were successfully given new life. I also think the all-wooden school that I went to in the 6th grade, that if that building would have caught fire, I think some pretty bad results would have occurred. And so some can be saved and some probably cannot. This panel, all panels today, have given us a lot to consider as we begin to process some of the legislation. Cindy, I wish you'd just give me an easy issue once to deal with, but obviously those have already been resolved. So again, to all of you, thank you very much. We stand in recess.